Officer Reed thought he was in control. Another night, another traffic stop, just another black woman he could intimidate. But when she dared to question him, his anger boiled over. Without thinking, he raised his baton and struck. The crack of wood against her arm echoed in the night. But instead of fear, she turned to him with a chilling smile. Because this wasn't just any woman. She was his new boss, the chief of police. In one reckless move, Reed had destroyed his career. But what happened next? Karma hit back harder than his baton. Stick around, because this story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. Corrupt cops think they can get away with anything, especially when they target those they believe are powerless. Officer Reed was no different. When he pulled over a black woman late at night, he saw an opportunity to assert his dominance. He never expected resistance, and he definitely never expected the truth, that the woman he just attacked was the new chief of police. One brutal mistake changed everything. How did she respond? And what happened to Reed? Keep watching to find out. You think you've seen arrogant cops before? Wait until you hear what Officer Reed did after realizing he had just assaulted his own boss. His reaction was priceless. But what the new chief did next was even more shocking. This isn't just about one cop's downfall. It's about justice being served in the most unexpected way. If you love seeing corrupt officers face the consequences of their actions, you won't want to miss a second of this story. Keep watching, because the best part is yet to come. Officer Reed had been with the force for years, but his reputation wasn't one to be proud of. He had been the subject of multiple complaints, racial profiling, excessive force, and abuse of power. Yet, time and time again, he managed to avoid consequences. Whether it was lack of evidence, silence from fellow officers, or victims too afraid to push back, Reed always walked away untouched. But that was all about to change. That night, as he sat in his patrol car scanning the streets, his eyes locked onto a black woman driving a luxury sedan. To him, that was all the justification he needed. Without hesitation, he flicked on his siren and sped up behind her, forcing her to pull over. The woman inside the car was calm, her hands resting on the steering wheel as she watched him in her rearview mirror. She had done nothing wrong, yet she knew exactly why she was being stopped. She had seen it happen countless times before. But tonight, she wasn't just any citizen. Tonight, she was someone who had the power to finally put an end to cops like Reed. Reed stepped out of his vehicle, walking toward the driver's side with a swagger that oozed arrogance. He tapped on the window. The woman rolled it down, meeting his gaze with an expression that was unreadable. "License and registration," he said, his voice laced with authority. She handed him her documents without a word. Reed barely glanced at them before deciding he needed to push further. "You know why I pulled you over?" The woman remained calm. "No, officer. Why don't you tell me?" Something about her tone irked him. There was no fear, no nervousness, none of the reactions he expected. He wasn't used to that. He wasn't used to someone challenging his authority, especially not a black woman. "You were driving erratically," he lied. Looked suspicious. Her eyebrow arched slightly, but she still didn't react. "Erratically? I was driving the speed limit." Reed's patience wore thin. He wasn't used to being questioned. "Step out of the car," he ordered. She sighed but complied, opening the door and stepping onto the pavement. Even in the dim streetlights, her presence was striking. She wasn't just confident. She carried herself with an air of authority that made Reed uneasy, though he didn't know why. "Are you carrying any weapons?" he asked. "No. Mind if I check?" "I do mind." Reed's lips pressed into a thin line. That was it. He had given her a chance to submit, to fall in line. But she refused. In his mind, she was being disrespectful. And in his world, disrespect had consequences. Without another word, he reached for his baton. The moment happened fast, too fast. Before she could even react, the wooden truncheon came down hard against her arm. The crack of impact echoed in the night air. Any other person might have screamed, stumbled back, or begged for mercy. But not her. Instead, she did something Reed had never seen before. She smiled. That was the moment everything changed. Because in that instant, Reed realized something was very, very wrong. The woman straightened her shoulders, her eyes locking onto his with a look that sent a chill down his spine. He had seen fear in people before. He had seen anger, even defiance. But what he saw in her eyes was something far worse. Power. And then, she spoke. For words that turned Reed's world upside down. You just hit your boss. For the first time in his career, Officer Reed felt fear. Real, gut-wrenching fear. His grip on the baton loosened as his mind scrambled to process what she had just said. His boss? That was impossible. But as she reached into her blazer and pulled out her badge, Reed's stomach dropped. The golden emblem gleamed under the streetlights, the words Chief of Police glaring back at him like a death sentence. Reed had just assaulted the most powerful law enforcement officer in the city, and she wasn't going to let him walk away from this. Officer Reed's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of his mistake sank in like a stone. He had just struck the new chief of police, the very woman who had the power to end his career with a single phone call. The silence between them was deafening. The chief didn't move, didn't even rub the spot where his baton had landed. She just held up her badge, letting the golden emblem do all the talking. Reed's eyes darted between her and the badge, disbelief twisting his face. "In no way," he stammered. This is a joke, right?" The chief tilted her head slightly, her smile never wavering. "Do I look like I'm joking, Officer Reed?" His breath hitched. His grip on the baton tightened before he quickly lowered it, as if that would erase what had just happened. He swallowed hard, his mind racing for a way out. I didn't know that I was the chief of police," she interrupted, her voice deadly calm. "Or that you were assaulting an innocent civilian." Reed opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had never been in this position before. Usually, he was the one in control, the one calling the shots. But now, the ground beneath him felt like it was crumbling. "You profile people, don't you, Reed?" she continued, stepping closer. "Pull over whoever you want, treat them however you want, because you think no one will hold you accountable." She let out a low chuckle. "Well, congratulations. You finally pulled over the wrong person." Reed's pulse pounded in his ears. His training told him to regain control of the situation, to assert dominance. But how could he when the woman standing before him outranked him in every way? "Chief, I didn't mean." "You didn't mean to get caught," she finished for him. "Let's be honest, Reed. This isn't your first time doing this, is it?" His silence was all the answer she needed. She took another step forward, forcing him to back up slightly. "I read your file before I took this job," she continued. "I know all about the complaints. Excessive force, racial profiling, threats. But somehow, you've always managed to slip through the cracks." Reed clenched his jaw. "Those were just accusations." She raised an eyebrow. "Accusations? Or patterns?" His mouth opened, then closed. He had no defense, and he knew it. The chief glanced toward his patrol car. "Radio your station," she ordered. Reed hesitated. "Why?" "Because I want every officer on duty to get down here. Right now." His eyes widened. "Chief, please." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The authority in her tone was enough to cut through the night like a knife. "Now, Officer Reed." He had no choice. With trembling fingers, he reached for his radio. Static crackled before he found his voice. "This is Officer Reed, requesting immediate backup at my location." The chief crossed her arms. "Tell them the truth." Reed's breath caught in his throat. "Chief, say it." He hesitated for only a moment before finally speaking. I just assaulted the chief of police." The radio was silent. Then, a voice responded. "Repeat that, Reed." Reed swallowed the lump in his throat. "You heard me." The chief smiled. "Good. Now let's see how the department reacts when one of their own finally faces justice." Within minutes, sirens filled the air. The officers arriving on the scene had no idea what they were walking into, but they were about to witness the downfall of one of their own. And for the first time in his life, Officer Reed knew he wasn't getting away with this. The night air buzzed with the wail of sirens as patrol cars screeched to a stop around them. Their red and blue lights painted the street in an eerie glow. Officers stepped out cautiously, hands near their holsters, confused as to why one of their own had called for backup in such an urgent tone. Reed stood frozen, gripping his radio like it was his last lifeline. His mind raced, searching for a way to control the narrative. Maybe he could twist the story, claim she had resisted, that he had acted in self-defense. Maybe he could convince the others to back him up. After all, he wasn't the only officer on the force who thought the way he did. But then, the chief stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I assume you all heard the call," she said, scanning the faces of the assembled officers. "Officer Reed here just confessed to assaulting the chief of police." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some officers glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Others looked at Reed, waiting for an explanation. Reed clenched his jaw. He needed to act fast. It was a misunderstanding," he stammered. "I didn't know who she was. I thought she was being uncooperative." The chief's voice remained calm but firm. "So you hit me because you thought I was just another black woman you could intimidate?" Silence. A few officers shifted uncomfortably, realizing exactly what was happening. Some looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze. "Tell me, Reed," the chief continued, "would you have reacted the same way if I had been a white man in a suit?" Reed's mouth opened, but no words came out. He had no defense. He had been caught, and everyone knew it. The chief turned to the officers surrounding them. "This is the culture we have allowed to fester in our department," she said, scanning the crowd. "How many of you have looked the other way when this kind of behavior happened? How many of you stayed silent when someone filed a complaint?" More uneasy shifting. Some of the officers, the ones who had covered for Reed in the past, suddenly seemed a lot less confident. "I'll tell you what's going to happen now," the chief said. "Officer Reed is going to be placed under arrest for assaulting a superior officer. His record will be reviewed, and if I find so much as a shred of evidence that he's abused his power in the past, he will never wear a badge again." Reed's eyes went wide. "Wait, what? You can't." She turned to the nearest officer, a sergeant who had been watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. "Sergeant Daniels, please do the honors." Daniels hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. He looked at Reed, then sighed. "Officer Reed, you are under arrest." The color drained from Reed's face. "You can't do this. I'm one of you." Daniels ignored him, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Turn around." Reed didn't move. His eyes darted around, searching for support, but none of the officers spoke up. Even those who had once defended him refused to meet his gaze. The chief tilted her head. "Funny, isn't it? When you had the power, you thought you were untouchable. Now look at you." Reed let out a shaky breath. He knew he had no way out. Slowly, he turned around, allowing Daniels to cuff him. The click of the handcuffs was the final nail in the coffin. The chief stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Reed could hear. "This department is going to change," she said. "And you're kind? You're done." Reed gritted his teeth as Daniels led him toward a waiting patrol car. The weight of his actions, his arrogance, his unchecked power, it had all come crashing down in one moment of blind rage. And now, for the first time in his life, he was the one being taken away in handcuffs. Officer Reed's once confident strides were reduced to slow, reluctant steps as Sergeant Daniels escorted him to the patrol car. The man who had spent years wielding unchecked power over others was now powerless himself. His mind raced, trying to grasp at anything that could save him. Maybe there was still a way out. Maybe he could talk his way through this, claim it was a misunderstanding, convince his fellow officers that he had simply made a mistake. But as he looked around, he saw something that made his stomach churn. No one was coming to his defense. The officers who had once laughed at his crude jokes, who had covered for him when complaints piled up, who had turned a blind eye when he used excessive force, they were silent. Some looked uncomfortable, others unreadable, but none of them stepped forward. Because deep down they knew. They had all seen officers like Reed before, men who thrived on power, who believed the badge gave them the right to do whatever they pleased. And for the first time, they were watching the system hold one of its own accountable. Reed's voice was hoarse. "Come on, Daniels. You really gonna do this to me?" Daniels didn't respond. He simply opened the back door of the patrol car and gestured for Reed to get in. Reed hesitated. His pride refused to let him take that step. "This is a mistake. You know that, right? I've got friends in this department. He turned his glare toward the chief. This won't end well for you. The chief simply smiled, unfazed. The difference between you and me, Reed? I don't need people to cover for me. My authority comes from earning this position. Yours came from intimidation and fear. And tonight, that power ends. Reed clenched his jaw, but deep down, he knew she was right. Daniel sighed. Get in the car, Reed. Reed had no choice. He swallowed hard, ducked his head, and slid into the back seat. The very seat he had thrown so many people into over the years. The door slammed shut behind him. The chief turned to the remaining officers. I know some of you don't like what just happened, she said, her voice steady. Some of you think I'm here to tear this department apart. A few officers glanced at each other but said nothing. I'm not here to destroy this force, she continued. I'm here to fix it, to make sure that officers like Reed, officers who abuse their power, never get to wear a badge again. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you should ask yourself why. Silence. Then, one officer stepped forward. He was young, probably new to the force, and his expression was a mix of hesitation and determination. Chief, he said carefully, if we see something like this happening again, what do you want us to do? She met his gaze without hesitation. Report it. Call it out. Do what's right, even when it's not easy. The young officer nodded slowly, and then, to everyone's surprise, he lifted his hand in a crisp salute. One by one, others followed. Some hesitant, others firm, but the message was clear. They understood. The culture of silence that had protected men like Reed for years had just been broken. The chief let out a slow breath, then turned back toward her own car. But before she got in, she made one final glance toward the patrol vehicle where Reed sat in the back seat, his face shadowed with rage and disbelief. She leaned in just enough for him to hear her next words. You thought you were untouchable, she said. Now you know. You never were. Reed didn't respond. He simply stared ahead, jaw clenched, as the reality of his downfall settled in. And with that, the chief got into her car, knowing that this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but tonight, justice had won. As the patrol car carrying Reed disappeared into the night, a powerful message echoed through the department. No one is above the law. The chief had made it clear. Corruption, racism, and abuse of power would no longer be tolerated. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about changing a system that had protected officers like Reed for too long. But this is just the beginning. Do you think departments across the country should follow this example? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want more gripping content, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more powerful stories that keep you on the edge of your seat.